Shortly after Christmas 2012, Santa Claus packed up his things and moved from the North Pole to Brooklyn, New York. Stemming from an argument with the elves, reindeer, and Mrs. Claus over the ever-increasing demand for gifts and how to handle these demands, Santa Claus was convinced he needed a change. In Brooklyn, he found himself a small apartment where he lived a small life he enjoyed very much. And while Santa was very glad to be away from the stress and pressure of preparing Christmas for the entire world, he did miss his family immensely. He often thought about sitting by his roaring fireplace while Mrs. Claus knit wool socks for the elves or cooked gingerbread treats for the reindeer. He missed the clicking of the needles and the smell of the cookies. In short, Santa was homesick. Acting on a desperate impulse, Santa jumped in his sleigh and made way to return to the North Pole. He traveled all day and all night to get home right before supper, the happiest time of the day when all the elves, reindeer, and Mrs. Claus would gather in the great room with the big table to eat, laugh, and be all together very happy. However, due to a high volume of snow and traffic, Santa arrived not right before supper, but in the smack dab middle of it. As he burst into the great room with the big table, everyone immediately fell silent. You could hear a candy cane drop, and in fact did, as Mr., the smallest of all the elves, dropped his candy cane in excitement. Unfortunately, not everyone was so excited to see Santa. Many of the elves were hurt Santa had abandoned them for Brooklyn, and were not moved by Santa's talk of isolation, disillusionment, and frustration. True, some of the elves did not even know the meaning of all these words. It was at this moment that Mrs. Claus rose to speak, and again, candy canes could be heard to drop, and again, Mr., the smallest of all the elves, dropped his candy cane in both admiration and fear of Mrs. Claus. Standing up from her place at the center of the table where Mrs. Claus preferred to sit, as it let her interact with as many elves and reindeer as possible, she scolded them all. Miss Claus told the elves they should forgive Santa, as he did have a very difficult job, and besides, that's what friends do. Miss Claus then turned her warm face to Santa and told him it was wrong to abandon them like he did. She had also felt isolated, disillusioned, and frustrated, and also very lonely. Santa, with a tear in his eye, apologized and said that he too had been very, very lonely. It was at this point where the snow seemed to come down twice as hard and the great room with the big table get twice as warm. It is said there was not a dry eye that night, and not one sad heart. Now everything seems to be back to normal, and indeed Santa and the elves are hard at work preparing this year's Christmas as we speak. And for me, well, things are back to normal for me also. I'm back to making these commemorative productions for Santa and the gang, and back to discriminating against and racially abusing the elves, who I sincerely believe to be a stupid, meaningless waste of organic matter only good for putting things together humans have already designed. I hate elves with all my being and believe they are fundamentally less than. They are terrible little fucks that are stupid, morally bankrupt, and if I had the chance I would murder each one with the most painful methods available. I imagine curb stomping would be heavily involved. So, to everyone out there listening, have a very Merry Christmas this year, and remember, just like Santa, you can always go home.